Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. My name is Kerry Miller, joined as always by my good friend Graham Dorn. It is our midweek, mid-major extravaganza, which includes the Big East. But first, Graham, I wanted to touch on two results from last night on leagues that we won't discuss again until Sunday. In the ACC, first off, Virginia at Louisville. Virginia won. They kind of look like a three seed now, although we're both, struggling to get them up to a three seed just because it's such a crowded field. And the Cardinals all of a sudden might be like the eighth best team in the ACC. Where did you land on the Cavaliers and the Cardinals in your morning scrub?
Yeah, I think for Virginia going through, I think they're like you said, they look like a three seed to me. But as I went through and actually started comparing them to other teams, I ended up with them 15th overall as a four seed. In Louisville now, when you really start to look at them, I have some concerns about the Cardinals long term. I actually moved them from my don't blow it category down to my quite likely category. I mean, everything tells me Louisville still has the squad that should make the tournament, but I am a little bit cautious now. So I think Louisville suddenly has some real possible paths to not making the tournament, which really seemed very, very unlikely even a week ago.
Yeah, I mean, after their win over Tennessee, it felt like they were solidly the second best team in the ACC. We were all looking forward to that Duke Louisville game. Not anymore. I think I have them seeded as my sixth ACC team. I have them at 25 overall, so a seven seed, but without Michael Brown, they feel like a very mid-tier ACC team. Hopefully he gets back soon and, we can evaluate them like the committee evaluated Bonzie Colson's Notre Dame a couple years back, or a couple years. It was like 9 years ago at this point. And then the other one, Michigan State beat Indiana. I think that was like a 53-53 game. And then Cohen Carr just broke the Hoosiers and the Spartans ran away with it. No significant change for Michigan State. That was a game they were supposed to win, but I think Indiana went from just barely on the outside looking in to, blew another chance and now they're like 10 to 12 teams out. Would you agree with those assessments?
Yeah, and on our past pod, we talked about how I had Illinois final three seed, you had Michigan State final three seed. I went ahead and moved Michigan State up to my final three seed, but yeah, Indiana, it's starting to get a little bit scary, much, 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 much more so than Louisville. If you look at
Yeah.
Indiana, they're just lacking the quality wins at all that you would expect for a team in the tournament. And looking ahead at their schedule, I don't see a lot of easy wins for them. So I am a little concerned that Indiana, partially through scheduling too weak of a non-conference schedule, may be putting themselves in real danger for the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I think the only positive for Indiana is that four of their five losses were Quad 1A. Now they are 0-4 against Quad 1, but they can make up ground in a hurry if they did get hot, but they've shown that they're probably not going to. All right, enough on those leagues. Let's go to the Big East and the mid majors. And last week we started out on the Big East, but then I asked today on Twitter who you want to talk about, and it was all pretty much all Mountain West questions. So let's go straight to the Mountain West. While I look up who asked these questions, we can start on Utah State. I think that was Brian J. Floyd was asking like what their ceiling is. They have really good metrics, but as he pointed out, they could finish 28-3 and be 0-3 against Quad 1. So how are we feeling about the glass ceiling on Utah State as I feel like it is? Because like every time I look at them, I'm just like, no, I got to scrub somebody else above you because you can't possibly be 20 overall right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that it's I metrics actually aren't a huge thing for me. They're part of the process. But I don't know if you noticed it, but last night I actually went ahead and posted where my live seed lines were last night. That was not knowing where any metrics were going to lie. Nothing has changed whatsoever based on the metrics compared to where I was analyzing these teams based on just what I viewed to be their resume. Uh, I look at Utah State, and even though I'm not really that big on metrics, I think they're more illustrative for them than they would be for other teams because what I see is Utah State's a very good basketball team, a team that's rarely challenged when they're playing anybody on their schedule. but they also haven't really beaten much of anybody. You look at those wins: VCU, Boise State, Illinois State. If Illinois State is your third best win, I mean, there's
Yeah.
not a whole lot there. So I think there is a bit of a ceiling with Utah State, even if, let's say, that qualitative average ended up moving to like 15 or 16. I think their resume metrics are still going to be a better indicator of where they're going to end up. Or alternatively, let's say the resume metrics keep improving incrementally because they keep winning, but the qualitative average goes down. Then I think the qualitative average is going to pull them down. I see them, whatever happens with Utah State, I think they're going to get the worst of the treatment that they could be getting simply because they don't have the big wins that really prove they're as good as we think they are. I see them very similar to Louisville last year, who had fine metrics, but they just didn't have the big wins to back it up. The committee loves to see big wins. Utah State just doesn't have them.
I mean, assuming that the committee will go as poorly as possible on any Mountain West team is generally the way to go. So, astute point there by you, but to the metrics point, they are between 21 and 28 in every single metric except for net, which really your opponent's net matters way more than your own net. So somewhere in the 21 to 28 range. So they're a 6 or 7 seed. And that's about where I've had them for pretty much the entire season, it feels like, certainly since early December. Then we had another question on the Mountain West. Who did that come from? Our boy Anthony Schneider, old Hawkeyes fan, but he asked max amount of bids the Mountain West could get, which I think is becoming an interesting question because for a while it was looked like only one. And now New Mexico looks pretty solidly in. San Diego State is making a bit of a run. They don't have the quality wins yet because they, kind of took it on the chin there for a little bit in November. But three bids probably in the end for the Mountain West. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best guess. I'd say Utah State. One other at-large team that will probably separate themselves. My guess is probably New Mexico will be that team, and then a third could end up being maybe it's a San Diego State sneaks in. Maybe it also becomes a team winning the Mountain West tournament who wasn't otherwise
Sure.
going to get in. 2.5 seems like the right space. Like, is it two? Is it three? I'm not quite sure, but I would be surprised if it's not two or three. I think it will wind up being one of those two.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that was it on the Mountain West, but we'll stick in the mid majors. Gonzaga, St. Mary's, nothing new on that front. Santa Clara is getting a little bit interesting again. I forget what tournament they even played in where they ran into St. Louis and lost. Was that the game that went down to the wire, or was that the St. Louis Stanford game, or both of them? I don't even remember, but it was one of those games where it was like, this is the big opportunity for one of these teams to prove they belong. St. Louis got the win, and we still both have them right in that, 31-32, so an 8 seed range, and Santa Clara's on the outside looking in. But metrics wise, they're 52nd in the net, 60th resume average, 53rd predictives average. I mean, that's a classic bubble team that just so happened to also take a quad four loss, but they'll have opportunities against Gonzaga and St. Mary's. Do you think there's any chance for the Broncos? How close are they?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a chance. I do think that that league's ultimately probably going to send two teams. I think it's just going to be Gonzaga and St. Mary's, but certainly not like by any means out of the equation. I would target, if they beat Gonzaga, that changes things a lot, but maybe more so, they got to get ahead of St. Mary's. If they can finish ahead of St. Mary's in the WCC, that gives them a pretty good chance. I think if they finish behind St. Mary's, there's not going to be too much of a chance.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the bottom of the list with the only undefeated team still in here. We got to talk Miami, Ohio, as long as they keep winning. They beat Central Michigan by about 43 last night or something absurd. Um, some people think they could be a single digit seed when all is said and done. I mean, I feel like they have to run the table to get a 10 seed. I think they have to go undefeated in conference or in regular season and then lose like in the MAC championship to have any case for an at-large bid. But what you have Miami, Ohio at 45, I have them at 47, so right there in that 12 seed range. How much longer do you think they will go undefeated? Because they don't have to play Akron again, I don't think, during the regular season.
I'm going to go ahead and say it's within the next 2 weeks. I think that there starts to be this pressure, kind of what you talked about.
Mhm.
It's like we need to go undefeated. We need to go undefeated. I think it's just going to build up. I'm guessing sometime in the next 2 weeks they take a loss.
And then the only other team here on the list that we haven't mentioned is the local one, George Mason. They got another win. It was a close one. Didn't help them in any of the metrics at Loyola Chicago, which was down like its entire roster and still came down to the wire. But a win's a win. That's George Mason fashion. They're now 17-1. Again, there are the projected A10 champs. We don't have to grapple with where they would be in the at-large mix, but let's do that for a moment. We both have them above that cut line at 42 and 43. What do you think the Patriots' chances are in the long run? Because I'm starting to believe.
Long run, I still think it's unlikely, but what they've done so far is really starting to build forward. You look at that resume metrics average 39.7. That would probably be solidly in the field if they had to get an at large at this point. Not saying that they wouldn't be seated poorly, but I do think George Mason would be in the field today if they needed that at large. Ultimately, I think the Loyola Chicago game kind of showed they're that close, right? Like they're very close to taking these losses that will
Mm,
dramatically punish their resume, which is kind of sad because you look at it and 17-1, it feels like they're playing teams that you can lose to. Whereas Miami, Ohio, it feels like there's really like little to no chance a good team should lose those games. The teams George Mason's is playing, it actually feels like they could lose some of these games. You almost feel like their resume metric average should be significantly higher than Miami's, but it's not. You look at the win over VCU, that's a quality win. Florida Atlantic's pretty good going to Fordham. Um, just kind of shows how valuable that zero in the loss column is. I like George Mason's team. I think they've got a very legitimate at-large shot, but unless they start to pick up some of these quality wins like St. Louis, it's going to be a tough road.
yeah, I think that game against George Washington on Monday looms large. I mean, that's probably the only game of the day. I assume most of the major conferences aren't playing on Monday. It's a weird one. Usually teams play on Martin Luther King Day, but also they avoid the football national championship. I haven't actually looked at the full schedule for Monday, but that'll be a key one to keep an eye on. Last one on these mid majors of these other mids to watch over here. So we already talked about Santa Clara, McNeese, Tulsa, touched on San Diego State, Dayton, VCU, which has taken back-to-back losses to Mason and St. Louis to drop onto this tier, replaced by Miami, Ohio. Of those six, who do you think has the best chance of an at-large? Because obviously McNeese is most likely to get in by winning the Southland, but if they needed it, who would be the most likely?
I don't know which one between Santa Clara and VCU I think is the best team, but I think the one most likely to get an at large is San Diego State. I think the opportunity is there in the Mountain West, and so I'm going to go with them.
I would agree with that. All right, moving on to the Big East. We had one question on Creighton from Southwest Region Bracketology. How close is Creighton? And then he wanted to hear our order on St. John's, Villanova, and Seton Hall, which we have right there. Villanova at the top, then St. John's, then Seton Hall. A little bit of separation between them. But Creighton, I mean, if they had lost that game, which it looked like they did to Georgetown last night, I think they would have been as good as dead. But they still have semi-close metrics. If they were to who do they play at Providence? That's not going to do a whole lot to help them this week. But I mean, if they happen to catch Connecticut napping, if they get a win over St. John's, they're there, right? They're in position to be in position, as Rothstein would say. But right now, I don't think they're even remotely worth considering actually being in the at-large field. Would you agree?
Completely agree.
All right. Connecticut at 2 overall for both of us now. I temporarily had all of the undefeateds at the one line, but then Iowa State lost last night, so now I'm reevaluating them, putting Connecticut back where I had them before. I had them at 4 overall behind Michigan and Iowa State. Now they obviously move ahead of both of them to 2 overall. They won at Seton Hall last night. Where did you have Seton Hall before that? Did that really do anything to hurt the Pirates? Obviously, it was a missed opportunity, but it's not a damaging loss.
No, not a damaging loss, but I will say for Seton Hall, the best thing they had going for them is pretty clean quadrant splits. All of a sudden, that mark's damaged a little bit, so I actually did drop them down a little bit, even though it's not a bad loss, just because really what Seton Hall had going for them was a very clean looking resume. And now you can start, in my opinion, start to factor in those qualitative metrics a little bit more with the seating.
Yeah, I think if they were to lose to St. John's on next Tuesday, then they start to really slip to the bubble just because they don't have that great win. What their best win is NC State, who you have in a little bit more comfortably than I do, but either way, that's not a fantastic win in Hawaii. And then at Kansas State, they're nowhere close to the at-large conversation. At home against Creighton, who we just said is not really that close either. So I think at some point they need to pick up an actual quality win. There were really only 5 chances in Big East play. Those are the 2 games against UConn, the 2 games against St. John's, and I would say really more so the road game against Villanova than the home game. But you can put that in. Say there's 6 then, and they've already missed on 2 of those, losing at home to Villanova and Connecticut. So I don't know if I believe in Seton Hall in the long run. And I don't think it's so much that they weren't expected to do much before the season, but I don't know how their staying power is. Anything you want to say on Butler before we wrap up? We still have them ahead of Providence and Xavier as not a terrible loss, but I don't think they're. I mean, if Creighton is 5 steps out of the field, Butler's 10 steps out.
Yeah, I think Xavier, Georgetown, Marquette, DePaul, Providence, they're really pretty much done as far as I'm thinking about at larges. I really not a consideration at this point. Butler, I looked a little bit closer at for like, are they even worth really keeping them right in the bubble picture? I would say they're as close as you could be to falling off the bubble. And that's really where I see Butler right now. Like it's going to take a lot to get into the field, but still a bubble team.
Yeah, I think the metrics mandate that we keep them in there. But we'll wrap up there. Big East mid majors. We didn't even talk about games of the week. I guess I pointed out Mason, George Washington. That's good enough. Until next time, enjoy the hoops.